The war really started in 2014. Ukraine had a democratic, very corrupt, but ultimately democratic government. And so every 4 years, they would go towards pro-Russian government, pro-Western government, kind of seesaw. Then in 2014, you had the Ukrainian nationalists take power with a lot of money from the West and Europe. And as a woman in Donbass told me, when they went after our language, one of the first things the Ukrainian government did in 2014 was try to suppress the Russian language. And half of Ukraine speaks Russian, So she said to me, I knew there'd be war. Most of the Ukrainians had left. Now it's 95% pro-Russian. And Ukraine has been bombing Donbass, Donetsk, missiles landing outside my front door, my local cafes hit, schools, hospitals. It was crazy in Donetsk, incoming all the time, bus stations hit, people just lying dead on the street. There needs to be peace for everybody's benefit. And now, hopefully with Trump, we can find it. Maybe the war will just have to carry on. So if Trump succeeds, basically gives everything the Russian wants, it could end this summer. If not, I think just let the soldiers deal with it and it'll be another year.
We have very different viewpoints on many things.
But a lot of these issues are American issues. They're not Republican or Democrat issues.
The war in Ukraine has been told from really just one side. What we hear from the U.S. government, the mainstream media, and lots of these massive bureaucratic institutions. But what if there's more to this story? Well, our guest today, Jonny Miller, has spent more time in Russian-controlled Ukraine than almost any other Western journalist. He's seen things the media won't talk about. He's faced threats for his reporting probably from both sides, Russia and Ukraine. And Jonny, I've seen some of your work, and you definitely don't hold back when it comes to this war, the West. And actually, I think I even saw you mention in one of your posts recently, the U.S. could use a little Putin-style leadership. So, Jonny, welcome to the show. You've had a front seat view of all of this stuff that's going on around you. So how would you introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Well, yeah, I've reported from around the world. I was in Libya, Syria, Africa, Asia, and I promised myself no more war zones. It was pretty stressful. But when the war in Ukraine started, like many people, I'm a big fan of Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer. So I knew what was going to happen, like many people, that Ukraine would be destroyed, that Russia would ultimately prevail, and that also that the British and European economies would be damaged if you cut off the oil, the gas to Europe. So I knew what was going to happen, like many others. And so I went to Ukraine originally and left Ukraine after a couple of days because I knew my reporting was going to get me in trouble. I'm critical of extremism in Ukraine, critical of the NATO position, and in conflict zones, you can't get away in Russia, for example, running around saying I love Zelensky, and just like you're not going to get away on the Ukrainian side being critical and promoting peace talks. Essentially, I promoted peace talks right from the beginning, and that would have been in Ukrainian and Western interests if that happened. I'm a man of the left, to be honest, but I'm very happy Trump won because I think Trump has more chance of anything than ending this war. So I left there and then went to the Russian side and got into Donbass. So that's the Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine, and spent a long time there, about 18 months on and off there, and in Crimea, and now based in Moscow.
Wow.
So obviously you got into journalism for the big bucks, right? No, but what was your motivations originally to get into journalism in your youth? What sets you off on the future to become a journalist?
Well, I did. If you go way back as a teenager, my favorite book was Orwell and Orwell's 1984 and this kind of stuff. And then I got into Chomsky when I was, young in 20s and realized the world isn't quite as they say it. And there's a lot sort of, So then I got involved in political journalism and TV company, and then started traveling a lot, different countries around the world. And then you sort of get pigeonholed a wee bit. So when the war, I've had a lot of experience at conflicts. So It started, that's where I can work as well. I experienced that. And now it's 3 years almost covering this damn war. But it's something, it's what I care about more than anything else. I'm British, I'm European. This is my home, And so more than any other wars in Africa and Middle East, whatever, that's why I really dedicated my last years of my life to this war in particular.
So you mentioned that right when this war kicked off, you could kind of see what was going to happen here, right? Ukraine, a much smaller country, Russia, a powerhouse with military force. What is one of the biggest misconceptions about these regions in the Western media, right? We hear all the time, rah, rah, Ukraine, they're really winning the fight. You see that on Twitter all of the time. But then you read maybe some of the more reporting on the ground like yours, and you see a different side of this story. So what are we hearing over here that is probably not true in terms of strength, forces, casualties, that kind of stuff?
Oh, I mean, well, it's a big question. I think what's interesting, a lot of my work, I spent so long in Donbass, which is, the Russian-controlled area, which the separatists, if you like, controlled before the war started. The war really started in 2014 with Maidan. Ukraine had a democratic, very corrupt, but ultimately democratic government. And so every 4 years, they would go towards pro-Russian government, pro-Western government, kind of seesaw. But then in 2014, you had the Ukrainian nationalists take power with a lot of money from the West and Europe. And you have this ultra-nationalist extremist element, which is very important in the conflict, who hate the Russians, And the South and the East is Russian-speaking. There's so many pro-Russian people there, and particularly in Donbass. It's very, very pro-Russian. As a woman in Donbass told me, when they went after our language, one of the first things the Ukrainian government did in 2014 was try to suppress the Russian language. And half of Ukraine speaks Russian. Right. So she said to me, I knew there'd be war. So the East rose up. There's debates about how much Russia was involved. Of course, Russia took Crimea as well. It was very strategically important for them. And so you had this 8-year civil war going on. And then in the end, Russia's had enough of it. We talk a long time about the last 8 years, but I'm trying to say it as simply as possible. So why I spent so much time in Donbass is to say that, look, most people in Donbass support Russia. I think back in 2014, it was probably 70-30 pro-Russian. Most of the Ukrainians have left. Now it's 95% pro-Russian. And Ukraine has been bombing Donbass, Donetsk, missiles landing outside my front door, my local cafes hit, schools, hospitals. It was crazy in Donetsk, incoming all the time, bus stations hit, people just lying dead on the street. And so when you bomb people, they become quite angry at King Street. Right. So some people even say they're still Ukrainian, but Zelensky's bombing us. So, we don't want any more part of Ukraine. So that's the most important point of my work, and I dedicated so much to it, to say, look, in Donbass, most people support Russia. So there's a peace deal to be had. Ukraine gives up this territory because most people want to be Russian anyway. In Crimea, most people are pro-Russian. So, ethically, do I have a problem giving it to Russia? No, ethically. So that was the way to peace. But of course, it carried on. Now, increasingly, some people are understanding, even some conservative commentators are understanding Ukraine should have made peace earlier. There was an opportunity at the beginning of the war, of course, but right throughout. And that's what people like me have been saying. There needs to be peace for everybody's benefit. And now, hopefully with Trump, we can find it. Maybe not. Maybe the war will just have to carry on. So if Trump succeeds, basically gives everything the Russian wants, it could end this summer. If not, I think just let the soldiers deal with it and it'll be another year.
So paint a picture for us, because a lot of people, they hear about the casualties or offensives or how many munitions were spent, but it's all abstract numbers, and people don't realize that there's just normal folks, civilians, who are living in the area and trying to get by. How has the area changed? I'm sure, when you got there, the conflict had started a little bit, but I imagine the destruction has only gotten worse over time.
Yeah, it depends where you are. So in Donetsk is the capital of Donbass region. It's a very beautiful old town, city, large city. And there, the shelling was so bad, but if you went around now, you wouldn't necessarily know there was a war going on. You see all the pop marks on the wall, and it was a damn dangerous place for a long time. But then, of course, where the major battles have been, Mariupol, I don't know if you know Mariupol, big right. Major battle at the beginning of the war. I was there when it's still going on, apocalyptic scenes, half the city is completely destroyed. But now the Russians are rebuilding in an incredibly impressive way. I don't want to come across like a Russian propagandist, but it's quite impressive, the reconstruction they're doing. But in other towns in Donbass, it'll be apocalyptic scenes. I go into some small cities and you get in there and it is like a, post-apocalyptic American zombie movie. That's what war zones are like, And you go into these cities and you're like, just tear it down. Just just tear it all down because there's no point. But life comes back and they will rebuild. But then in other towns, so in Donbass, where the separatists were, that's extremely pro-Russian. In the other areas that Russia's taken over, sort of in the south of the country, there it's much more mixed. So in Zaporozhye region, Berdyansk, I went around. It's a beautiful seaside town, and there's no war there, so the Russians just rolled in. And there's a few soldiers patrolling the streets, etc., but nothing. And there you ask people, you ask people in Donbass, what do you think of Ukraine? And they'll say, we hate Ukraine, they bomb us. In Zaporozhye, most people just want peace. I went around, asked a dozen groups of people. Some were very pro-Ukrainian, some were very pro-Russian, some were very pro-Ukrainian. Most people just wanted peace. And I said, which do you want to be part of Russia or Ukraine? We don't care, we just want peace. Which sounds crazy. If Russia invaded the United States, and you went around and said, do you want to be run by America or Russia? It'd be very hard. Maybe some communists would like to be run by Russia or whoever, but it'd be very hard pushed to find anybody who says, oh, we don't care. Even Trump or Biden is better than the Russians running America, right? But in these regions, they speak Russian, they have Slavic culture, so they're very unique regions. So in these areas, so once again, when I think one of the most important points of my work and being in these regions is that, if what's going to have to happen is Ukraine is going to have to give these regions to Russia. We have to recognize that the vast majority of people in these regions just want peace and they don't mind, or they really want to be in Russia. And I do feel sorry for those who don't want to be in the pro-Ukrainian. But it's not as if Russia's invaded Poland and is occupying Poland and everyone's against it. These regions are unique. So there is a peace deal to be had based on that.
So it sounds like the war fatigue has really absolutely set in on both sides. And one thing I'm curious, obviously, Ukraine is going to ultimately have to cede this ground to Russia. But does that mean that at a certain point, Russia is going, does that mean at a certain point, Ukraine is going to remain divided, where you're going to have these very strong Ukrainian nationalists versus these Ukrainian separatists, all under an umbrella of Russia? It almost seems like this is not a long-term plan, because you're just going to have these problems on both sides still. And what's going to prevent an uprising?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to so many Russians, from Russian soldiers to analysts to all the rest of it. Nobody really knows how the war ends. I mean, how does Russia win? I mean, Russia will lose the war. These territories are, Ukraine can't take them back. But how does Russia actually end it? That is a difficult question. I wouldn't say there's necessarily war fatigue here. I mean, I'm in Moscow, and Moscow just feels like a normal city. Life just carries on. I mean, if you go into the countryside, more people feel it. A lot more people there have enlisted or mobilized. And so, Russia's lost a lot of soldiers. In Moscow, St. Petersburg, which should, just like normal European cities, very, well-to European cities, and life just carries on. So I think Russia doesn't mind if the war carries on for a long time, but it's in Ukraine where they're sick of it. I mean, Ukraine, the mobilization, Ukraine is really broken from it.
You're reminding me of this video that we saw of Tucker Carlson maybe a year or two ago, going through a Russian supermarket and saying, oh, wow, this is beautiful. Oh, this is so affordable, more than we have. And a lot of people on the West from the talking head media came and said, well, you have to realize they make 1/6 of what we do. So when you have the same grocery prices, you're paying your entire income. I mean, then you also hear reporting where, no, actually the Russian economy is doing fine. They've found these other routes to make this growth. So can you help me understand what it's like going to the store in Moscow? Can you walk out with a basket of a week's worth of groceries that you can afford?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I mean, Russia is generally a historically poorer country, so the wages will be lower. I don't know the statistics. Moscow and St. Petersburg, they feel like a very wealthy European city. Healthcare, university is cheap or it's free or affordable. So there's, Russia's a very pleasant place. I'm a foreigner here. There's also, when you go into the countryside, there's a lot more poverty. It's, you see poor areas, but it's a very nice, pleasant country. Of course, there's differences between how people earn. But, you go to Moscow, it just feels like a normal, and Moscow and St. Petersburg are two of the world's great cities. So they feel like two of the great European cities, like London or Paris is very special. But, and the economy is fine. It's doing well. People are out, drinking on the Friday nights and all the rest of it. And so the Russian economy is okay. they took a bet, the West, or NATO, I should say, that they could crash the Russian economy with the sanctions and with the war. I think there was a tiny chance that could have happened, but it hasn't happened. And instead, it's the British and European economies particularly which have been damaged. And that's why I'm so upset about this, that particularly the Europeans just went along with the Americans. And we've damaged our own economies massively. Killed 500,000, or we don't even know the figures yet, of Ukrainians. For what? What? And we've only damaged ourselves. When Russia's, it's carrying on as normal, pretty much.
So what's the morale like for Russian soldiers, right? So, if you were to listen to Western media, you would see the numbers of casualties and death figures, and you would think that, oh, this must be putting a dent in their morale. Or also you hear about their resistance to the early partial mobilization efforts, and Putin's weary of having to do another general mobilization. But then sometimes you'll see videos of Russian soldiers on Telegram who are quite optimistic about this special operation. What is your perspective in interviewing these folks?
I was in Donetsk when just before the Ukrainian counteroffensive started of 2023. I don't know if you remember that, a huge Ukrainian counteroffensive they're going to take back the state.
Right.
And all these Western journalists were there saying it's going to work. General Petraeus of the American military says it's going to work. And I was sitting in Donetsk going, what are you talking about? And I wrote, I don't make many predictions. It tends to make fools out of people who make predictions, right?
Right.
But I wrote that it's going to be a disaster. It's going to achieve nothing. And it was even more of a disaster than I thought it would. Because I saw all this propaganda from Western media, which is the Russian troop morale was low, all these kind of stuff. It's not. There's certainly it varies, but most of the Russian soldiers are soldiers who joined up willingly. A lot for the money as well, but also for patriotic reasons and all the rest of it. And the morale is very good. Russians are, they're also fighting an existential war on their own borders. And Russia does military pretty well, and I'm driving through Zaporozhye region, and the organization is huge with the defenses, all the rest of it, and all this propaganda of Russian morale being low, it's just crazy. So I think, I haven't been on the fronts for quite a long time, but it's also tough on the front. You see these, sort of very Russian nationalists, pro-Russians saying, we're going to go to Odessa, we're going to go, it's also very tough. I hear stories, a lot of the time I don't publish, and I know what it's like on the front as well, and it's tough on the front. War is hell, so, and, Russians and Ukrainians are both pretty tough, so it is difficult to see how, it ends. If Trump gives, Putin essentially largely what he wants, and security guarantees, largely security guarantees, and Russia wants to end it definitively. They don't want to have to fight this again in 5 or 10 years' time, because I think some people in NATO will want the possibility to start it again. There's what's going to happen with China and the Middle East. This is a global game, so I think Russia needs to end it definitively. But also, how do you do that? Russia says they want to denazify Ukraine, which means get rid of the anti-Russian government. How do you do that without rolling your tanks into Kiev? So there are a lot of questions, and there's this sort of question between the Russian nationalists who they want to go all the way. They want Odessa, whereas Putin is much more of a cold-hearted strategist. So that's going to be interesting to see. Yeah.
So I said in my opening, and maybe it's a little bit of a joke that you made, that the West could benefit from a little bit of Putin authoritarianism, right? But my question actually is kind of are the Western democracies more of just a facade in your opinion? No. We're already ruled by this oligarchic class of billionaires. So talk to me a little bit about that. Would we still feel free? Was this just an illusion that we're living under now that you've seen kind of what it looks like on the other side?
No, to correct you, I didn't tweet that, but you messaged me saying, what can be best to talk about? And I thought, I looked at your page and thought you like talking about ideas, so it came to my mind, so I texted you privately about that.
Then I rescind, okay.
So what I meant by that was, Russia, people say Russia is a dictatorship, mostly. It's a more authoritarian country, more control of the press, more control of politics. Every country and region has different political history. In Europe, we look at America and then you guys are crazy. I love America, by the way. New York's my favorite city in the world. I love America. But
we are crazy, though. You're right. You're right about that.
Us Europeans look at America, what the hell is wrong with you? The level of homelessness, the level of rich people can just give donations to political parties as much as they want. There's no limit. You guys love your freedom so much. You can just do any old shit, you know? Whereas in Europe, we have much more tighter controls over our democratic systems, and we're more socialist at heart as well. You know, mostly even conservative British people are shocked by the bad healthcare, standards in America in terms of the insurance or however you do it. And Russia takes that a step further. It's more socialist in its mindset, maybe because it's called a country, because of their political history, and it's also more authoritarian. And I think that's natural within the political history. Russia needs to keep its country together. It's 11 time zones, it's a huge country. So, whether Russia's a democracy, I don't know, they do have meaningful elections or the rest of it, but it is more controlled. And Putin's from KGB, it's more controlled. But in Russia, you ultimately have the oligarchs ruling, or the security state. Putin took that power from the oligarchs who ran it in the 90s. The oligarchs ran it, and it was a disaster, Russia in the 90s. So Putin essentially took back power from the oligarchs. Some ended up in prison, some ended up dead. I don't know how, there's always speculation who did it. And some went along with them. And you do kind of, so what I was saying to you the other day was that, America's got so insane, and Europe as well. You have your last president, Joe Biden. I mean, he wasn't mentally capable to run the country. I mean, I'm sorry to be rude, but he wasn't mentally capable. What the hell's gone wrong? And so in America, and your foreign policy is controlled by security state, CIA and whoever. And the corporates, business, whatever, they run the rest of it. And the American government's just running it. So what you're saying with Trump, and I like Trump in some ways, he's trying to take on the CIA. This is why I see it, to try to take back foreign policy to the American government. And he's aligning the oligarchs. He seems to have got them all in line. Right? To say, right, true, yeah. You need to start acting in the country's interests. I mean, that's being a positive way of looking at Trump. Obviously there's more problems with some governments more than others. We could talk about countries all around the world. But I think America needs a change of course. I don't know if Trump's the right man or not. I'm a man of the left. So, there's so much Russian propaganda. I don't want to come across like a Russian propaganda, but people are really nice. The economy's going well. There's free or affordable healthcare and whatever. My ex-girlfriend was still a good friend, but a Russian girlfriend, and she seems to have brothers fighting in Donbass, and he was mobilized, and he's a drone operator. He's just getting the stuff done. But my girlfriend seems to complain mostly about the roadworks. They're constantly doing roadworks around here, constantly doing up the Riverside Walkway, which I don't think needed to be done. It looked very nice before. And they're constantly doing up Moscow. Just built a new bridge over the river. It's very, and it's like, and she seems to think there must be some corruption involved. So many roadworks. These are the same kind of complaints that you hear in Britain, And so there's so much criticism of the Russian government to be had, like any government, but it's not some evil place that, yeah.
It's very interesting. Last week, we are coming off the heels of interviewing Dmitry Alperovich. I'm going to mess up the name. But he wrote Alperovich, and he wrote World on the Brink, which talks a lot about the Chinese problem with the Americans. And they have this faucet running at high blast with propaganda coming out of it to kind of sow division in our country and show us increased levels of Hamas messaging or LGBT kind of extremism, that kind of thing through TikTok or other avenues. So we also know that the West and Russia have their own methods of propaganda. And I'm wondering if you can help a guy like me who goes to work every day in the United States in New York. What am I on the lookout? How can I determine if something out of Russia is propagandized? Do I have to look into who's paying for it? Do I have to just parse through the data? Or can you maybe point me to something that is Russian propaganda? Just a very
people say I'm a Russian propagandist. But I just, you can make your own mind up. I love Europe. I see Russia as part of Europe. So that's just, my political views are the same as Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, and so, propaganda is so many things, like Russian media, Russia Today. But Russia Today, there's some fantastic journalists there. They do some really good work around the world, but they have their interests, and so, and the new whole social media world.
Let me ask it a different way, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it would be in Russian interests to become a bigger part or player of Europe, as you just mentioned. But I almost feel that in American interests, especially under Trump, we're taking this more populist national stance. Is it potentially in America's interest to divide Europe even more so than just booting Russia out of it?
Well, that's a big question that in my work, which I have a lot of pushback from, a lot of difficulties because of. That's what I advocate, that Europe needs to start standing on its own. And one good thing about Trump coming in is a lot of Europeans are realizing, hey, wait a minute, maybe America isn't our friend, they're a competitor. And they are a competitor. And I believe that Europe's best interests will lie with good relations with Russia, so we can use all their cheap resources to build up our energy. It's not a very radical idea. But so, I think Europe, and that is an idea that's been floated, that this war has been good for America because it's cut Europe off from the gas. So we have to buy more expensive American gas. Brilliant. Well done, guys. Well done, America. Very clever. And but that has always been historically a plan for the United States to keep Europe away from Russia. And that this war has certainly achieved that. And so what I advocate for is Britain and Europe coming in. I mean, whether you're looking to China, whether you're looking to Russia, whether you're looking to the United States, go wherever it's good for you for investment and energy, all the rest of it. And I think that is I hope what we'll see in the coming years.
Is that a view that you've held prior to your experience in this conflict, or is it something that's evolved on it? So, and along those lines, were there any other presumptions and conceptions that you had coming into this conflict that your on the ground experience changed?
Well, I don't know, but as I knew broadly what was going to happen, which is largely what's played out. But I think we're really seeing, the changing world. It's a multipolar world now. China's no longer rising. It has risen. Russia's resurgent. And Europe has been bashed around for the last 20 years. You look at the economies of America and Europe. America's been doing fine. Not for many people, but Europe's economy used to be about equal. I think I saw a graph the other day, about 20 years ago, they were about equal, the European Union and America. And now it's whoosh. And Europe's in a bad place now. And I think it needs to make peace in Ukraine, get the gas running from Russia again. But all this anti-Russia stuff in Europe is insane. I mean, and very few people in the mainstream have had the courage to stand up. In Britain, which I know the best, obviously, 2 commentators in the media who stood up. In America, you have a lot more. You have the likes of Tucker Carlson and Trump, essentially, and even Elon Musk used to put out some tweets about Ukraine that could have sounded like my own. So you have that sort of MAGA stuff, which I basically am very much aligned with in terms of Ukraine. But in Europe, you've had almost nothing, which is shocking. What are these great universities, Oxford and Cambridge, for? All these media outlets, all these politicians, because everyone's scared to be called a Putin propagandist or Kremlin asset. And if you keep going, they'll write articles about you on Google, try to ruin your career. In my case, phone hacking, death threats, all the rest of it. It's extreme. And because they try to shut down anybody who speaks up for Europe and for Britain, for what I believe is their interests. And there needs to be more courage and patriotism within European and British society to make these new... And policy needs to change. The world has changed. The world has changed. It's changing right in front of our eyes. And I think Trump is recognizing that, and it's going to be a crazy 4 years. At least under Trump, they're changing their policies. Europe needs to catch up.
So I want to dive into that phone hack a little bit, and then also just other opposition that you might have had or attempts to silence or censor you in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, it reads like a handbook how to silence a journalist, right? So right. I went to Donbass for 3 months, beginning. And then I went back to London and I wasn't worried because I'm very careful about my reporting, made sure it's very kind of balanced in life, whatever. Then I came back and then there was persecution of journalists. A friend of mine, Alina Lipp, she's a German journalist. She got a court order from Germany. She could go to jail if she went back. British guy was sanctioned by the British government. French guy was stabbed in Turkey just after leaving. He blames the Ukrainians. And then as my work grew, it escalated. So if you Google me, there's this hit piece. It's not by the mainstream press because my work is very professional. What could they say about me? But these fake websites that go to the top of Google searches, all the rest of it. And then it got really serious. Some of my work in Crimea went big and they hacked my the evening after my work went viral, they hacked my phone, deleted all the messages from my girlfriend, and sent me death threats from her account. We know where you are, you're dead, that kind of stuff. So, and then it gets even more extreme. When I started work again, it got even more extreme. When you get hardcore offline death threats, I've been online for 2 years, but a lot of people get that offline stuff. And
wow.
Yeah, so it gets really hardcore, the offline stuff.
That's pretty wild. Did you do anything to like entrench or protect yourself or get security or leave the area? Or
I'm doing some writing about that at the moment, like the psychology of death threats, because you see it online. Look at they tried to kill Donald Trump. I say they. Yeah. I mean, it's various different people, but it's everybody from Donald Trump to journalists in Gaza or the West Bank or whatever around the world. And if you're rich, if you're Donald Trump, you can help with security. If you can't, what can you do? You change phones. I've got about 10 different phones at home. People just trying to stop it, or the hacking or death threat. And so they just get into new ones. And you get security advice. One security expert said, I know what they're doing to you. They're trying to make you destroy yourself so you stop your work. It's all psychological warfare as well. And what can you do? Go to the church, pray. A lot of people, I know somebody who stopped his work as an activist. I won't say for what, but got to the point, guys hanging out at his front door, just saying hi. You don't need to say more than that. He had a 3-year-old kid. Stop my work. I can't go. I know people who stop their work because of this stuff. Recently I've seen on Twitter very prominent people, I won't mention names, they cancel their X accounts, they do all this, disappear for months, all this stuff. And it can get serious. But even, for less than that, these hit pieces that go on Google about me, before coming to Ukraine, I was shortlisted for commission for the BBC, just a human story. I couldn't do that now. The commissioner would look at my Google and I'm a pro-Russian propagandist. So that's what they do for any politician or journalist or whatever in the mainstream. They never destroy people's careers. There's all these tactics, and that's why I'm so upset with British and European security services, media, all the rest of it. We need these new ideas. The world is changing. And for me to say we should have peace in Russia, and because I'm reporting on the Russian side, I'm still trying to ruin my life. And listen to me, because I was right about everything. I've been right about everything. But it's nuts. I mean, as I say, look at everyone from Donald Trump, penniless journalists. They'll if you piss the wrong people off, they'll try and kill you. What's that? Killing.
I personally was a little bit, not a victim, but I was ingrained with some of the cyber warfare of the Ukraine war in terms of the Fella organization out of Ukraine and out of the United States, actually. I was called multiple times a Russian propagandist for just posting how much money has been sent or what some of these things, questioning the narrative. Frankly, the Tucker Carlson shopping cart video. And I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and I'm a very small account of comments with calling me Vatnik and all of this weird stuff. It actually made me very nervous. So we did a whole podcast episode about it, and I was afraid, I don't know, we're spreading stuff. We found data that shows that like 80% of the web traffic that's talking about the Ukraine war is actually by bots. They track hashtags from both sides. And over here, if you ask the typical news enjoyer who watches TV, they're going to tell you that the Russians are the master propagandists since 2014, 2016. We've been hearing this in the Trump world, that, Russiagate, X, Y, and Z. They're the primary enemy. And so you would have guessed, right? Russia's running this online campaign, but it really turned out, based on the hard data, this is Ukraine who has overwhelmed the internet with their sentiment. So it's been very alarming. And that's why when we heard about the Ukrainian offensive last 2 years ago now in 2023, it was very shocking because that was never the goal. This was always Russian aggression. And that was the United States or the collective West was able to stand on this ethical high ground to say, this is a war of aggression. It needs to stop. But to go onto the offensive totally throws away that argument. And I think, as you kind of hinted at, it threw away any advantage that the Ukrainians may have had militarily. So I'd be curious if you could help us understand, like, what was their goal? What was your understanding of their goal to go on the offensive here? And what was that like? Because it must have been a shock to the Russian people as well to say, uh-oh, are the tables turning, right? What was that like when that began?
You mean the Ukrainian counteroffensive?
But
Yes.
so yeah, exactly, the counteroffensive. Yeah.
Well, so first, I actually met a Russian internet troll the other day. I made friends with him. I posted online some problem that I was having in Russia, and he messaged me he said, I can help you out with that. So we met up for coffee, and he's a really nice guy. He works in tech. Really nice guy. He said, I started going online because I wanted to discuss my political ideas, like same as you guys. Then he got people so rude to him, he thought, screw it, I'm going to be an internet troll. And I was just very abusive. He's a normal, nice guy. So, the NAFO stuff is insane. So the NAFO, the head of, the guy who founded it, Pekka, something rather, Finnish guy, I don't know if you know him, he released my private documents online. So at the same time I'm getting hacked, and they're threatening my girlfriend. I go online, a letter I wrote to the Russian government, probably a normal letter, I need to work. And so my bed. So I think, yeah, anyway.
To make peace with the NAFOs, what I did was I ended up ordering this shirt, the Borscht shirt from St. Javelin, to get the soup. So I did support their cause, but it was to get them off my back, basically.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also the first experience I had in NAFO was when associate member of RUSI, which is a British military think tank, I wrote something online. I only started my account a few years ago when the war started. And he said, you need to attack this guy. So I had all these NAFO guys attacking me with these memes. This is an associate member of a British military think tank. So there are questions you had about how organized this all is. And I think it's reasonably well organized. They've spoken at a conference, NATO conference, all the rest of it. This information warfare is brutal. And going after people's psychology, a lot of people stop their work online because of social media abuse. I don't blame them. People kill themselves over that. So this kind of abuse stops a lot of people, and that's what NAFO was fighting. But the counteroffensive, no, I mean in Donetsk, some people were worried because the front lines are on the edge of the city,
right?
And you speak to, and as I said, the front lines are tough, so there would a little bit of nervousness about it. And I spoke to the Russian head of Zaporozhye region in his underground bunker and interviewed him about it. He said, yeah, of course we're worried. You've got the whole of NATO backing these people. But the lines basically didn't move. I mean, in Zaporozhye region, the Russians have built defensive lines as far south as the Black Sea. So it shows you they're worried. But they didn't even reach effectively the first defensive line. So the Russians were prepared. But of course, they huge counteroffensive, but they really didn't achieve anything. And I hope people in the Western NATO military establishments lost their jobs. I haven't seen any news about that, but they should have. I mean, it's a complete disaster. And whether they should have gone on a defensive or the rest of it, that'll be for the historians.
So between the counteroffensive and then the most recent victory plan, would you characterize Ukraine's optimism as, I don't want to say delusional because that's more derogatory, but just perhaps not grounded in realism?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole of NATO pretty much. I mean, Donald Trump is the only kind of realist, I think. I mean, I don't understand what kind of... If Trump can't negotiate, find an end, then, I mean, now you're having 18-year-olds, the rest of it, mobilized. So some people think the war will be over in 6 months. I'm not so sure. I mean, I just think about the years that it'll take longer. I think, listen, the Ukrainian army could collapse tomorrow. That's a possibility. But Russia also doesn't want another big city battle. Mariupol is a small city. It's a city. And they're having to rebuild it. They don't want to destroy another city and rebuild it. Kharkov is a huge city, 2 million people. Zaporozhye city is a big city. They don't want to destroy cities. Russia might have to rebuild them. So, but yeah, I mean, I think Trump, so, but Zelensky, I mean, he's in a difficult position. He's got the nationalists, ultra-nationalists on one side, and they're extremists, and I mean, he's caught in a bad place. Yeah. But still, it's difficult to see how it ends.
So I'm kind of curious too, because and this is to take it back to conversation a little bit. You say you see America as a competitor, not a true friend of Europe. I'm wondering how, and because there's some talks about it now a little bit as the sentiment is changing in the UK. Where was your opinions on Brexit, and perhaps a more united Europe today might be a better, force to defend themselves and their interests had they, stayed at one EU? Or do you feel that the EU is too federalized, right, and has too much of a top-down, exertion of their influence on other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I was in England when Brexit happened, and I was in Italy actually when the news. But I was, I mean, it was not in Britain's interest to leave the EU. I mean, I spoke to a member of the Foreign Office, and she told me that most people in the Foreign Office, they thought it'd be a disaster. I'm surprised British security agencies, MI5, MI6, whatever, didn't step in and make the vote. I mean, they should have. Like,
Right.
seriously, I'm a Democrat, but national, it's like national security, national interests trumps that. Why didn't they just come in? The head of MI6 came out recently, I think, and said, and lamented it. Oh, we shouldn't have let. Well, why didn't you do something about it? It's like 1% at one point. And so I think it's a complete failure of the British establishment, largely because all our media is owned by foreigners. What the hell is Rupert Murdoch doing in Britain? He doesn't give a damn about British people. So Britain is lost because, and now you've got Elon Musk. I mean, I kind of like Elon Musk, but at least, but you've got all these foreigners running British press, foreign interests. It's a mess. So no wonder our politics, we can't do anything in our national interest. That goes more broadly for Europe. So now they're talking about going back into the EU. But geez, I mean, the EU is so good. The EU, run by France and Germany. We just appointed an Estonian woman. I mean, the former,
Right.
sorry to be rude, but she's a former prime minister of Estonia. What the hell is Russia and Germany doing? Giving an Estonian control of their foreign policy, excuse me. What, are you crazy? These Baltic states are nutcases. She was given it because she hates Russia, But so the EU is so corrupt and incompetent. I think more so than the British government. So if the EU was run in European people's interest, rationally, the EU is far more anti-Russia than the German and French governments are, because the German and French governments are looking after their national interests more. So the EU is messed up. I mean, it's badly messed up. So in terms of Britain going back, I think Europe unifying is good. I think Europe working as a bloc in some way, absolutely, I think is positive. I think it needs to. But with the European Union as it is, I mean, it's not elected, the leadership of the EU. I mean, so I think they have a lot to sort out. Yeah. I don't know what you guys think about that.
It's tough because NATO is important. We over in America, I guess, believe in military supremacy. And I would think as a European, you look at having the Americans as a military ally and you say, wow, this is a great thing. We have to do whatever we can.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have this conflict. I mean, we have the defense contractors that are profiting. We are really the leader of NATO, so it seems like we're the ones that are coming out top. We're battling this war of attrition where who's going to peter out first, the Russians or the Ukrainians. And it almost seems like if there's any winner, maybe it's the United States economy. It's certainly not the Ukrainian people. It's probably not the Russians, even if they do get what they want here. And Europe, like you're kind of saying here, is just caught in the crossfire in a way. But almost, this is the way I see it, is a loss for everybody. We've now drained our military surplus over here. We have bigger, probably worse things that could be coming to the homeland or that will affect our technology sector, as we talked about last week with chips and other global conflicts. So to me, there's no winner here. And that's why, as you said at the very start, what your mission was is peace talks. Peace talks is what needs to happen. So yeah. We know that they want their sphere of influence. I'm just wondering, like, okay, how about this? Earlier in January, what we saw was the Russians cut off their gas to Europe, which included Moldova and Transnistria, which was like one of their last remaining occupied places, which is on the other side of Ukraine.
Well, I think it was the Ukrainians cut that off.
Was it the Ukrainians that cut it off?
Didn't renew the deal, so the deal ran out.
Interesting.
They ran out, so the Ukrainians didn't renew it. And you've also got Ukraine, you're bombing sites in Russia, which you're giving oil to Europe. Slovakian President Fico is saying you need to get the oil running again. So now you've got Ukraine actually damaging Europe's gas supply. These people are gangsters. What the hell are they doing? And you still have this criticism in the EU. Saying we need to cut off Russian gas because it's supporting the war effort. No, European industry needs the gas. What are you doing? So these people, they're really nutcases. And I think, this extremism, in Ukraine, it started because, I was there in 2014 in Maidan and saw the coup revolution, whatever you want to call it. And this extreme hatred of the Russian ethnics of Ukraine is what, one of the starters of this whole conflict. And Europe has that extreme hatred of Russia as well. And in some countries, Baltic, Poland, they've been run by the Soviet Union. So there's genuine kind of dislike there, And in Britain, the British establishment hate Russians. They've been fighting the dominance of Europe for a long time. France and Germany are more, it's Italy quite like the Russians, So there's all these cultural issues as well. But Europe really needs to understand it. At the same time, in a strange way, I'm very pro-peace journalist. But at the same time, I do, if you say that Europe needs to build up its military, there is an argument for that. Because how can we really be independent if we're relying on the United States? I mean, so there is an argument. We need more independence from the United States somehow.
So someone also from the left, I never like giving Donald Trump any credit, even when it's due, but I will give him credit for saying in his first term how NATO partners need to all meet their 2% GDP obligations. And even he was talking about more. And lo and behold, just 2 years of this conflict, all of our, as Cooper pointed out, all of our military surplus has run out. We realized that our production capabilities were nowhere they need to be for actually sustaining a conflict of any kind. So my question is to you, Europe has benefited for a long time being under the US's nuclear shield as well as the NATO alliance, and that's allowed them to focus on their economies and not spend as much of their GDP on the military. And certainly more folks are waking up to the idea that Europe needs to defend itself, or you're talking about a European pillar of NATO. But these are all, grandiose ideas. And having visited Europe a lot myself, just knowing the folks, I don't see a lot of them having an appetite to not only increase and enjoy the increase in taxes, but also commit towards more militarization. Do you think that's kind of like a dead-on arrival in Europe?
But also defend ourselves against who? Defend ourselves. Let me tell you, Russia has no interest in invading Europe. I mean, it's just absurd. They have their interests in Crimea and the south of Ukraine and to stop NATO moving into Ukraine. But Russia has no interest in invade. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes. An extremist regime is not going to take power in Russia. The Putin government and the Russian government, which I'm sure will come after, is not an extremist regime. I'm sorry, I live in Moscow. It's got huge corruption, all the rest of it, like anywhere, but it's not an extremist regime. And they want to be friends with Europe. They want to sell their gas to Europe. And so, Europe defend ourselves against who? I mean, the only things people would say we have to defend ourselves now is against illegal immigration, which is huge in Europe. But at the same time, obviously, countries do need military or the rest of it. But we don't need to defend against who? China doesn't seem like it's going to take over the world, except perhaps economically. But
So what gives you a little bit of hope? Because, and aside from perhaps Donald Trump coming into office, because I like to think about World War I and many other conflicts, right? They ended not because, the leaders came to their senses and decided that this is just a tragic war, we need to stop it. It was because they couldn't continue it any longer. They were all worried about societies collapsing, and the mobilization efforts had brought them to the brink. So now with the sentiments changing both on Russia and the Ukrainian side, do you think that there's hope because of that there might be, a better chance at peace talks in the coming year? Or do you think it's just going to continue this war of attrition?
Well, I have to say, if Trump negotiates peace in Ukraine, he should win the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, European liberals are so
Good luck getting them to actually give him that.
Because they give Obama, even though he didn't really do anything.
Before he did anything, and then started a drone campaign, yeah.
But genuinely, Trump, I mean, I don't care. I mean, I don't care, I'm no fan of Trump necessarily, but, the feeling is that he won't be able to achieve peace. That's the feeling in Russia, that the negotiations, he's made some good noises, but the feeling is they'd have to give Russia too much,
right,
that it wouldn't be politically possible. So I'm more optimistic now than I was, but the feeling here more in Russia is we have to carry on. And many Russians have said, as I said, how do you actually end it? You need to send tanks into Kiev, So it's really difficult to see. But as you rightly say, most wars end by just nobody can carry a gun, or one side can't carry a gun anymore, and it just, whatever reason, and that's most likely to happen, which is very sad. I know so many people have been killed in this war, and yeah.
Well, that's absolutely what will happen to the Ukrainians if NATO pulls the plug, and it sounds like that may be on the horizon. My personal belief is that the Russians are very hesitant to accept an American deal or accept a Chinese deal because they want to be the ones in charge, and maybe they'll come with one of these Qatari deals, or they want to come up with their own deal, I feel like, right? Because why would they hand the win to somebody else?
I don't think the Russians don't really, I don't think the Russians care about who comes up with the ideas, really. If Trump, I think Putin will be very happy dealing directly with Trump, but essentially they'll have to have all the demands met. They'll probably go in with some other demands they care about in order to negotiate with. But essentially, I really don't think they care. They want the security guarantees. That's it. There isn't necessarily much, I think, and Putin and Trump, I think, kind of respect each other in a way. So I don't know if they care about who comes up with the ideas, but essentially they're going to have to give Russia what it wants. Essentially, it's going to be basically what Russia wants, pretty much.
Very interesting. Well, Jonny, we've been very grateful for your time here. You are a wealth of knowledge. You've kind of given us a different side to things, especially our listeners. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for what you've done. You've put yourself in harm's way over and over. And even if people that are listening here or watch don't agree with what you're saying, or think that, other reporters maybe have a different take than you, I think that all sides are very important. So we're very grateful for you. Why don't you tell people where they can find your work or connect with you on social media, if that's what you like?
Yeah, I mean, Jonny Miller on my X account is the best way. Telegram accounts, but X is now basically the freest place. If it wasn't for X, I would basically be non-existent. I have a big following on X, but so that's why, as critical as I am of Musk and Trump, that they're pushing some freedom of speech anyway has been very good. So thank you, America, for your great work.
Well, that's the goal of this show, right? We both
really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you very much. And this has been Elevated Thoughts.